Parent Information Center of New Hampshire and New Hampshire Family Voices with the YAC Council present the YAC Council podcast. The YAC Council stands for Youth, for Education, Advocacy, and Healthcare. We're so excited you're joining us today. Welcome to our series on hiring support staff. In this series, we discuss how support staff can make a difference in a youth's life, the interviewing and hiring process. We have an episode called What Now, which discusses backup plans, and tips and tricks to keep the ball rolling. Welcome to episode 4, Keep the Ball Rolling. Tips and tricks for a great partnership. This episode was so much fun to record and I learned a lot. Let's get started so you can too. Hello and welcome back to our YAC Council podcast. My name is Ansley Peacock and I am the Transitions Initiative Coordinator for New Hampshire Family Voices and the Parent Information Center. Thank you so much for joining us again today. Today we're talking about how to keep the ball rolling. What are some things to remember when continuing to work one-on-one with staff? We're going to start with Abby, who is calling in today, and then we're going to hear from Keegan later on in the episode. So Abby worked one-on-one with a direct support professional or DSP named Shannon. So Abby, as time went on with Shannon, were there things you did together to make the days roll more smoothly?
When her shift started, we caught up over the things that had happened last shift, whether it be since last shift, if I had done my homework, if I had done my household tasks, if anything medically happened with me. She would touch base with my parents if they were home, and we planned out the day a week ahead of time, looking at the journal that I discussed in episode 3, the agenda, and determining which errands and appointments she would need to take me to, and also which goals from my area agency we would work on.
Wow, that's a lot of information to keep track of. Were there any things that you used to organize all that?
Yes, we used many tools that me and her created, and we used skilled independent living skills assessments from different websites and nonprofits to what I needed help with. We also kept a journal of what I did for each of my area agency goals. So when the monthly progress notes came around, it was easier for us to know what we did, and so we weren't panicking.
That is such a great tip and so important. And if anyone wants to hear about how Abby and Shannon worked on that for those progress notes, go back to our episode 3 and you can hear an awesome rundown of that. Thank you so much for sharing that information with us. So it sounds like you and Shannon had a great friendship within this direct support provider and client structure. I have a question. We all have days when we have spoons that are low or low energy. How did you maintain that friendship when Shannon's job supporting you meant pushing to get things done or telling you what to do to stay on track?
She was serious, but she was also fun. When we had to get things done, she was encouraging me by saying, "Come on, Abby, let's do this." But then she would make it fun by either listening to music while we did the tasks, taking breaks, or after the hard ones, I would get to do something I wanted to do, whether it be check in with friends or go online.
That's fantastic advice for anyone working with any young adult. Thank you for sharing that. It sounds like you and Shannon had a really good base of respect. For someone who might be listening, considering this work, what are some things that Shannon did that made you feel respected as a young adult?
She made me feel like a whole person. She saw all of me and didn't let me use my chronic illness and conditions as an excuse, but she did so respectfully. And that can be really hard depending on the day. And sometimes it can change hour by hour. Depends on my energy levels, not only my physical energy, but also my emotional energy. And she made things Abby friendly. She took the time to learn what worked for me and adapted daily tasks and chores and wrote down how we adapted them so I wouldn't forget. And in that process, she actually learned a few things that to help herself. And she also has ADHD.
Oh, wow. So, like, in researching things for you, she found things that were helpful for herself too.
Right.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for being authentic with that. That balance of, getting goals done or getting things done while also giving your body rest without doing it too much, because it can be a hard balance. So, thank you so much for
Mm-hmm.
sharing that. For someone who might be new to working with staff on the client side, are there ways that you can share that you respected Shannon?
I got to know her interests. All of the 9 months that she was with me, and I understood she had a job to do, and I tried my best not to give her a hard time when she asked me to get stuff done that I needed to get done.
Wow, that's awesome. And it's so important that you remember that even though this is a friend and she's cool and she's close to your age, she still had a job to do and you let her do that. That definitely is respect. It sounds like a relationship like that is smooth because of boundaries. Like, what kind of boundaries did you have?
One of the boundaries Shannon and I put in place was not to text each other after certain times or while we were in class. We also agreed if I had sent her documents or files or commented on those files, that she would get to it when she could, even if she was not with me
Oh, wow.
at the time.
So you had boundaries around time and communication. And there were still ways for you to check in, but she had independence in her own time outside of the hours that she spent with you. So she didn't have to be on 24/7.
Right. And so I could put something in my journal, um, if I needed advice on something, and she would get back to me when she could.
That's really important. And I'm so glad that you had those boundaries with her and that you can carry them into your next, when you hire your next DSP. Um, is there anything else that you'd like to share about working with Shannon?
Shannon and I and my OT, Hannah, were also a team because Shannon would come to my OT appointments with me, and take notes, and she also bonded with my OT. She would make sure that I did my OT homework and actually tell my OT if I actually am lying or if I did it.
That is super powerful too. And what an awesome note to like end your part of the series on. It shows how powerful a direct support professional can be, not only to you as an individual and to your family, giving you that independence and giving some time back to your family, but also your whole healthcare team, because you can have someone who is taking notes while you're doing those exercises and know how to reproduce them at home. That's fantastic, Abby.
Yeah,
Thank you so much for sharing all of the information. And I so appreciate the time and effort that you've put in and how awesome both you and Keegan have been recording this podcast. So thanks for calling in today.
you're welcome.
So now we're going to turn to Keegan, who's going to share some tips and tricks about the personal care assistant program.
Thank you, Ainsley. Abby, such a moving story again, as was in the first podcast and I'm sure in your subsequent podcasts. So for me, I think it's important we start to remind everyone that this is more of a business model. It's very much, I am technically the boss, but it kind of operates as a business. So a few tips I'm going to give you is, number one, the golden rule. Treat others the way you want to be treated. That doesn't always work out in your favor, but if you try to start there every single shift, every single day, the chances of your working relationship with this person is going to continue to be better. The second tip I'm going to give is kind of echoing Abby, and maybe I should have started this as number one, is boundaries are really important. I won't go into it, but I lived and learned. I made a mistake, and you just don't allow personal life to get in with work life. So that's from like the PCA, your ACW, which is attendant care worker. They're the same thing. That's from the ACW's relationship with you. On the flip side, consumers' relationship, I'm the consumer, relationship with the ACW, I would suggest, as much as possible, leave your personal life out of it. Okay? Like, my PCA, they met my grandmother, but that was only because they were helping me move out. The other tip I would give is, remember when I was talking about your LTS coordinator who also was in like a supervisory role in the last few episodes? Well, I would suggest keeping an open line with your LTS coordinator, of course, who's your supervisor, but don't report for every little thing. Like, if you can imagine, as a youth, because youth or emerging professionals are gonna be watching this podcast. If you can imagine how you feel if your brother or sister ran to mom and dad every single time for every little infraction you did. Showed up late for 5 minutes. You know, yes, your supervisor will make time for that and hear you, but the back and forth, if you fight over little things like that constantly, you're going to wear both you're going to be tired, and the person working for you is going to be tired because they won't know what to really do for you without being reported. So remember that your supervisor is technically above you. Don't keep major secrets, but use it only when necessary. The other tip I would give is similar to boundaries. Provide directives. Like, your PCA or ACW should ask you, hey, this looks like a mess. Can I fix this for you? It's your personal property. That should be a rule in place, that they ask you what you want done with it. I think the other thing, too, Abby kind of brought up in her presentation, but I'll echo it, is I didn't necessarily have set times because my PCAs and ACWs, they have lives like I do, right? Like, so, for example, a PCA might have 3 or 4 clients throughout the day and might not be able to respond to me until 8 o'clock, right? And I likewise am in class and won't be able to respond. So we had that respect, and we also, we didn't necessarily have times in place, but it was understood that after a certain time, you wouldn't, I wouldn't send a text out at 11 or 12 o'clock at night. 8 o'clock was usually the latest, unless they told me otherwise. And just a recent tip that I had been using, especially during COVID, with all the policies and procedures that were in place with that, every so often I would send a thank you message to your PCAs and your ACWs and the supervisor to let them know that they're doing the best that they can, and I appreciate that. You should do that anyway, but I really, really, really made it a point during COVID to do that. Lastly, do not hire friends. We kind of talked about this briefly last podcast, but if you hire friends, be prepared that the relationship might sour. Not always. One of the positive things I'll say is what sometimes works out is sometimes, like in this job, I met someone who I otherwise would not have associated with on campus, right? And so after we were done work, I asked that person's permission if I could be friends with him afterwards. Okay, and that was agreed to, and that was agreed in principle. We'd keep the two things separate. But the point is, in putting this here for us to talk about today, is I didn't use an existing friend for that. I actually made a friend, and that's actually one of maybe a good spot to end my portion of the podcast. Is you'll get to meet all different kinds of people, and you might, although it's important to keep your professional boundaries, you're their boss and they're your employee, but you might make good long-lasting relationships with your PCAs long after they're done working for you.
That is such good advice, Keegan. I used to work in as a merchant mariner ships officer, and there are so many things that you just shared, which is leadership. You are, setting boundaries with your employees. You're having clear instructions on, if there's something that's a mess, ask me before you clear it, so that they don't do it and you aren't upset, and that they don't feel like they don't get in trouble for something they didn't know how to do. And then the thanking them part. I cannot stress how important it is when you are supervising or overseeing someone else, which as part of the PCA program, you are their co-employer, just to thank them, and that's such a powerful tip that I'm sure people would love to implement if they thought to do it. So thank you so much for sharing that. You are a rock star and have such a good leadership style. And there are so many things that you and Abby both touched on that get into those nitty-gritty nuances that they don't tell you in brochures. So thank you so much, both of you, for, giving your time and effort to this podcast. I want to let the audience know that they've been working very hard behind the scenes to prepare for this. So just thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you for joining us today. We so appreciate our audience listening in on this podcast series, and we hope you'll join us for the next one. Look for the next Yeah Council podcast coming soon. Our music can be found on Pixabay. The recording artist is called Bo Gleasons, and the track is called Picture the Sky. Special thanks once again to the Parent Information Center and New Hampshire Family Voices for their continued support of the Yeah Council, the advocacy and hard work being done by the youth there, and this podcast series. See you next time.